following the discovery of a 500-year-old body, reveals that the man actually mummified himself. This is the mystery of the Tibetan mummy.
High in the mountains of Tibet, 12,000 feet above sea level, a small spirit house stands alone on a windswept ledge. Inside, a corpse, but a corpse like no other. Believed to be centuries old, it has never decayed. Locals worship him like a god. So who was he, and what was his secret? Could it be true, as some locals say, that this man actually mummified himself? Now, for the first time, an international group of scientists will try to find out. Their journey will reveal the strange powers of meditation, secret rituals and the fine line between science and the supernatural, and the mysterious borderland between life and death. Manali, India, a busy trading town in the foothills of the Himalayas, and the starting point for the quest to uncover the secret of the Tibetan mummy. The expedition is led by anthropologist Victor Mair of the University of Pennsylvania, a renowned expert on Buddhism.
It's been 2 years since I first heard about the mummy. I want to try to figure out how this man's body is preserved, whether it's purely a natural set of circumstances that led to the preservation, or whether it has something to do with his religious practice.
For Victor, the mummy is more than just an intriguing mystery. He believes it could provide some important lessons for modern medicine. He's put together a top team of international specialists on radiography and human remains to investigate. Margaret Cox has been brought in to analyze the mummy's bones and biochemical makeup.
I'm interested to look for evidence of disease and maybe dietary information, which may tell us how he lived, the things that happened during his life.
In charge of the X-rays is Bruno Tonello. Bruno's worked in tough conditions before. He recently led a team of radiologists into Kosovo to document the thousands of corpses there.
This is obviously, nothing like it. It's just actually the wildest place I've ever been to.
The mummy is located close to one of the world's most sensitive international regions, the border between India and China. And they'll have a narrow window of opportunity to work in. The team has been informed that their only access to the site starts in exactly 4 days. They must set off immediately. A journey of some 300 miles over some of the world's most treacherous territory.
As you're driving along these roads, you feel like the wheels of your Jeep are hanging over the edge, and you're going to fall over and go straight down thousands of feet.
It really is steep.
This is more than just a journey across a terrifying landscape. It's also a journey into the past. For 1,000 years, Buddhist monks have gathered in these remote, inaccessible valleys to study the great wheel of rebirth and the art of dying. Ancient Tibetan manuscripts describe how they would tap into the long-lost secrets of the human mind, and how their bodies would take to the air, transformed into rainbows. Day 2, and the expedition keeps climbing to an altitude of 9,000 feet, nearly 2 miles in the sky. The geology of this area is dangerous and unstable, but it was, ironically, that very instability which made this expedition possible. In 1975, an earthquake struck the Spiti Valley. 2 Indian Border Patrol officers were sent to repair a road ripped apart by seismic vibrations. "12,000 feet up, buried in the rubble, they made an extraordinary discovery. The mummified body of a Tibetan man, seated in meditation and perfectly preserved. A scroll was also found nearby, but it disintegrated before it could be read, its message lost forever. 4 days in, and finally the expedition approaches its destination, the Spiti Valley. Once part of ancient Tibet, this remote and beautiful place is known today as the Valley of the Monasteries. At the end of the valley lies Thabo, an isolated Tibetan community over 1,000 years old. This is where the road runs out. For centuries, life in Thabo has changed little. But the discovery of the strange body, now protected in a small shrine high above the town, has had a profound impact on local people. Victor pays a visit to the monks of Thabo Monastery. He's welcomed with a pot of traditional yak butter tea. These monks are deeply respectful of the mummy, but Victor is surprised by just how little they know about him.
Does he have any opinion about how old that is?
Actually, they're not really sure if it's a holy lama or if it's just a normal village person.
Yes.
And so they're not sure about how old it would be too.
But the abbot does shed light on one ancient custom. The bodies of important monks were often preserved as religious relics. Like the embalmers of ancient Egypt, the Tibetans would take the intestines out and pack the abdominal cavity with salt or resin. Many important monks were conserved this way after death. Some were even dipped in vats of melted butter. The bodies of the precious Dalai Lamas were said to have been covered in gold leaf. Victor wants to discover how these ancient practices might connect to his mummy.
Why do they want to preserve the bodies? Why?
It's always been a tradition because it's performed on high lamas, obviously because their body is holy. So it's just like a symbolism that they have.
These holy bodies, or kudung, were venerated for the good fortune they could bring. The team suspects that the body they've come to see wasn't treated in any of these ways. But the abbot has no idea exactly how it was preserved. That night, Victor and the team prepare for the final stage of their journey, the arduous 1,000-foot climb to the mummy's shrine. But there's a problem. They're close to the Chinese border, and the Indian military will allow them only 6 hours to complete work that should take days. The pressures on the team are mounting. The next morning, Victor Mair and his team set off on the last stage of their ascent to the site of the Tibetan mummy. There's only one way to the shrine, on foot. But at 12,000 feet, with 40% less oxygen, they're soon suffering from lightheadedness, nausea, and fatigue. With every step a burden, it takes 4 hours to climb the final 1,000 feet of a journey which has already taken them halfway around the world. But it is worth it. At last they come face to face with the Tibetan mummy. And right away, there's a surprise.
Oh, look. Oh, goodness. It's so small.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
So
extraordinary.
I never would have imagined that he could be so well preserved.
Yeah,
You know,
incredibly so.
But before their testing can begin, the team has a dilemma.
Wow, we're going to have a serious problem here.
The local community clearly worships the mummy, but the offerings that surround him will make their work extremely difficult, and the scientists are worried about disrupting the shrine.
It appears that he is considered to be a holy man, just from the objects that are arrayed around him. This would be done to a statue too,
Right.
a statue of a god.
Yeah,
So in a
yeah.
way, he's being treated as a god.
Yeah.
Very much so.
But then the monks safeguarding the mummy
I thought he was...
offer to move the offerings themselves to allow the team to do their tests. But even as they unpack, time is running short. They've got less than 6 hours to solve a riddle that may be centuries old. Conditions are far from ideal. The hut is cramped, and the mummy is awkward to reach. But with the help of an endoscope, they get the first close-up images of the body.
And there's quite a lot of damage to the skin. It looks almost moth-eaten is the only expression I can think of. There's quite a lot of mould, I think, growing on, or fungal spores on the skin.
This is very strange. It suggests that the body was preserved without traditional embalming techniques.
If he was subject to any form of preservation treatment, I would suggest it hasn't worked very well because of the unevenness of the decomposition of the skin.
Yet somehow, much of the body is extremely well preserved.
The eyes are remarkable because you've got a shrunken eyeball sitting there. And the other eye, which is semi-closed, the eyelid's complete and you can actually see eyelashes. It's extraordinary.
The flesh, the hair, they're all intact.
This fabric right round his neck, again, that looks slightly moth-eaten. And I can even see the reason why. There are little pupae, little maggoty things in there eating the fabric things.
Just about saw it there. There we go.
Yeah, they're all over the fabric and they're eating the fabric.
But something disturbing has caught Margaret's eye.
It might sound a bit ridiculous, but he's got fabric tied round his neck and under his thighs.
What purpose could there be for this strange fabric? Could it have something to do with his death?
If he pushed his legs forward, he would actually strangle himself. Bit of an odd thing, but...
The monks let Margaret take a tiny sample of hair for lab tests.
We can actually do a radiocarbon date on it and see how old he is, because we haven't got a clue whether he's 100 years old or 500 years old or 1,000 years old.
Just as baffling is the question of who he was.
If he had achieved this kind of weird posture before death, what would it be telling us about him? It looks to me as though he's meditating.
Yeah.
I suspect that he was a monk.
A holy man, a Buddhist cleric. As a Tibetan monk, his life in a monastery would have begun at an early age. He would have followed the path to enlightenment in an attempt to become a Buddha. It was common for parents to bring their firstborn son to the monastery. In an initiation ceremony, the boy's hair would be mixed with rice and tossed into the wind as an offering to the gods. The boy then received his new Buddhist name. The completion of the ceremony marked the end of childhood and the beginning of a new life as a monk. From now on, his needs would be few. The possessions of youth laid aside for holier items. Back in the hut, they've got just 4 hours left. Bruno quickly assembles his state-of-the-art digital X-ray equipment.
Okay, right. So
You ready for the first image?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. There we go.
Can the X-rays explain how the mummy came to be in such a curious posture?
Oh, great.
You have a pretty good set of dental X-rays there.
Oh, wow.
There's some bits on there.
Wow, that was worth the effort.
More importantly, will they provide a clue about when he got into that position? Was it before or after he died?
Could the twisting have come about just because of post-mortem shifting?
Possibly.
So it seems kind of unlikely that the connective tissue around the spinal column would have been collapsing when the connective tissues on his hands and his legs and presumably his neck, from what we can see, is all in good order still. It's holding his body in that position.
So it seems a bit more likely then that this posture was adopted before death.
It could well have been adopted before death, either because he had no choice because he had a disease process in play, or because he'd been sitting like that for an awfully long time and it was the most comfortable place to be.
Or
You know.
he was meditating like that for a long time.
Yeah, that's right. So I imagine if you meditate for a long time, it's quite possible that you would actually adopt a poor posture.
That posture, the curvature of the spine, points to the life of a monk. Each day of that life would have begun with the chanting of the sacred texts. Hour after hour, he would have sat reciting religious verses, known as mantras, the jewel in the lotus, the eightfold righteous path. Even as a boy, he would have learned to control his thoughts through simple meditation. But few monks would attempt to master the most powerful, the most dangerous Tibetan mental disciplines. Does the mummy's severe posture suggest that he was pursuing these disciplines when he died? And what role did the strange fabric belt play?
I'm still mystified by this strap around his neck.
And
It seems like he's got himself in a very contorted position.
Well, it's a bizarre thing to do because the one thing you could guarantee if you slipped was that you throttle yourself.
Would it have been with that in mind? I mean, could it have been?
I can only look at his bones. I can't tell you what was going on in his head.
Since ancient times, monks have used meditation cords or belts to hold their bodies in difficult yogic positions. But the position of this cord around the neck of the mummy is very difficult to explain.
The idea of a meditation belt, I can see how that would work. You simply have something around the back of your neck and under your thighs, and that would hold you in position.
To continue meditating to the very last moment.
That's right.
Yeah.
But to have it wrapped right round your neck, it's something that could easily result in strangulation, and it seems a very, very strange thing to do.
It is a disturbing thought. Did the mummy deliberately meditate himself to death? The team's 6 hours are up. Margaret has only enough time to take one last sample from the belt for carbon dating. But the greatest mystery remains. How on earth did this mummy avoid the normal processes of decay?
What normally happens when somebody dies is that the gut bacteria that they have within their body will spread around the body using the vascular system almost as a superhighway, and that initiates an enzymatic destruction of tissues as well. Clearly they haven't happened with our mummy, apart from the very initial stages where you get biochemical change to some of the tissues, which is why his lip has started to curl back.
Clearly, something strange happened to this monk, something that halted the natural process of decay. That night, back at base, the team tried to make sense of the conflicting evidence they've gathered.
But then he wouldn't have had this strap around his neck. Plus, we know something about these straps as being used in meditation, for meditations.
But we don't know if the strap is contemporary with the mummy until we do a carbon-14 date on the strap. If we do and get the dates as being similar, then you can say there was something very strange going on.
So we've got to get carbon-14 dating both for the mummy himself and for the strap.
Yeah.
From the evidence that you have supplied me with, I think the curvature of his neck, for example, shows that he was in this posture for a long time. Therefore, I think that his mummification was not the result of what people did to him after he died. I think he was a participant in what happened to him. I really feel that I need to find out what sort of meditation practice he was following. The book isn't closed on this case yet, but I think I know where to go. I think I know which direction to head.
Good luck.
Yes, indeed.
The next day, the other researchers head back to Britain to run the crucial carbon-14 tests. But Victor remains behind. His path is about to lead him to a much less scientific world, a mystical world of strange powers and ancient wisdom. First, he heads back to Manali to visit one of the oldest sects of Tibetan Buddhism. They're known as the Nyingmapa, and they are the guardians of the most secret forms of tantric meditation. Victor wants to find out if the mummy could have been engaged in one of their rituals. He has a meeting with the Spiti Tulku, the spiritual leader of the group and a master of tantric meditation.
I'm fine.
Victor shows pictures of the mummy to the Tulku in the hope that he may be able to explain the mummy's posture.
The mummy is seated in an unusual posture.
Yeah.
Why do you think he was doing it in this very, very unusual way?
Maybe he has like a special method.
Unique
Yes,
method.
unique. And also he's using that gomtak, you know.
A belt?
Yes. Sanskrit they call rishi. Rishi.
Yeah.
The Tulku explains that the belt helped the monk maintain the rishi, or sage posture, and kept the knees drawn up to the chest, a posture just like that of the mummy. The Tulku also suggests that the monk may have been practicing one of the highest forms of meditation, called Dzogchen. These advanced yogic postures also employed a meditation belt to free the body and travel deep into the mind.
Dzogchen is very secret.
Very secret.
Many people, they don't use it in the outside. When they practice very secretly, then they used.
I see.
These techniques are believed to create immense physical power, so powerful and dangerous indeed that a master would only pass them on verbally, and only to one monk at a time. It is also said that an accomplished practitioner of Dzogchen meditation can harness his mind in remarkable ways at the moment he dies. According to Tibetan belief, such a monk can channel his spirit, allowing his flesh to revert to its original form, pure, white light, energy released through the head in an explosion of color. The rainbow body, a sign of passage into nirvana. But where does the myth end and reality begin? If he is to understand more about mental powers of the mummy and how he came to be so preserved, he needs scientific evidence about the effects of Dzogchen meditation.
The only place in the world that I know of where they're studying this phenomenon scientifically is in Boston.
It's time for Victor to head back to the USA. The search to explain the mysterious mummy of Spiti Valley has taken Victor Mair from the mountains of Tibet to the skyscrapers of Boston. For years, Dr. Herbert Benson of the Harvard Medical School has been conducting experiments on Buddhist monks from Tibetan monasteries to assess the effects of meditation on the body's metabolism. His research has provided a remarkable insight into the ways the mind can alter the functioning of the body.
What we found with respect to their oxygen consumption, in simple meditation, they decrease their metabolism upwards of 64%. And this was the largest decrease in oxygen consumption that was ever recorded in experiments by a simple restful procedure.
Carefully monitoring a form of Dzogchen meditation known as Tum Mo, the yoga of inner heat, Benson came up with even more intriguing results.
What we found initially in Tumo was that monks were able to increase their skin temperature in environments of 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit.
But that was just the beginning.
Well, what we found in these monks in very cold environments of 40 degrees Fahrenheit, wrapping themselves in wet sheets, these monks astoundingly could increase their temperature enough to get the sheets steaming and dry the sheets. You and I would go into uncontrollable shivering and perhaps even die of too low blood pressure. They were quite comfortable there simply by performing their Tumo meditational heat yoga.
When asked how they do it, the monks describe relaxing, focusing on their breathing. They picture air coming in and out as a kind of energy. They visualize it as a flame, a fire coursing through the chest. Dr. Benson has shown that anyone who performs the initial steps of meditation can have a significant effect on their body. Meditation can help the treatment of stress-related health problems, such as anxiety, depression, high blood pressure, and cardiac irregularities. But can Dr. Benson's evidence about the physical power of Buddhist meditation help us understand what happened to the mummy of Spiti Valley?
Learning about Dr. Benson's work has given me a glimpse of the tremendous powers that the Tibetan mummy might have possessed. If they could actually dry icy sheets using heat visualization techniques, I wonder if the mummy could have dried his body the same way.
Could this really be the explanation for the mummy's death? Could it really be that he literally dried himself out? In an attempt to find answers to those questions, Bruno Tonello takes his pioneering digital X-rays of the Tibetan mummy to Ian Watt, one of London's top radiologists.
Well, I think they're fantastic images, Bruno, and I don't know how you did them. I mean, it's remarkable in the circumstances that you were working under. I suppose the striking feature, first of all, is the curvature in his thoracic spine. That's almost certainly because he was dehydrated and the discs have narrowed down at the front. Interestingly, we can still see some soft tissues lying in front. Then we come to the face, and the really striking feature was the teeth.
Yes.
I mean, he's got wonderful dentition. He's got no evidence of dental caries. He's got no evidence of gum disease. So if we sort of put all this together, what have we got? We've got an amazingly healthy-looking man of somewhere between perhaps 40 to 45 years of age at the time of death.
And no other generalised...
No, he was a very healthy man when he finally succumbed to whatever process that he subjected himself to.
So it seems the mummy was a healthy man who for some reason brought about his own death. But why would he do that? And why is his body so perfectly preserved? 1 month later, Victor gets a new lead.
I've heard that there are similar mummies in Japan, so I feel like I really should go there to see for myself.
Deep in the Japanese countryside, in the shadow of the legendary Mount Yudono, lies a remote Buddhist shrine known as Churenji. For as long as fires are burned here, the Japanese monks have performed rituals of self-sacrifice to ease the burdens of their people. None more so than this man. The mummy Tetsu Monkai is almost 200 years old, but he is venerated to this day for his extraordinary acts of suffering on behalf of his community.
His left eye seems very empty. Is there some reason why it seems more empty than the right eye?
2 centuries ago, when Tetsu Monkai's village was stricken by a terrible epidemic of eye disease, he believed that there was only one thing to do.
But did he pulled his eye out, plucked out his eye?
左手と左目って言うんだけど、痛くて取れませんよね。担当ってわかります？刀。ナイフ。
Knife? Oh, he poked his eye with the sword and took it out. Oh, to help others.
Yes.
So this is the concept of juku.
Yes.
Juku. Taking on himself the sufferings of others. Amazing. He would have the determination to do such a very painful thing to help other people.
But Tetsu Monkai was not the only monk to practice juku. Next, Victor travels to the site of the revered Bukai, a mummy never filmed before, but whose state of preservation may provide clues about the Tibetan mummy's preservation.
No one's ever been able to photograph him before, so I really feel a special privilege. He's bowing in a very reverent way.
Despite damage from the high humidity, the mummy is still surprisingly well preserved.
I need to look more carefully, but well, that's mold on his chin and in his jaw. So this would indicate that he has not been lacquered or shellacked or varnished for preservation. No one has done anything artificial.
Somehow, just like the Tibetan mummy in Spiti Valley, Bukai has been preserved without embalming or special treatment. And local monks have an unexpected explanation. They say Bukai mummified himself. It seems Bukai, determined to become a permanent source of inspiration, starved himself by eating only tree bark and nuts for 3 years. Then he climbed into this box. Inside, he meditated for days. As he neared his end, the box was lowered into the ground. It was a living death. But it may also have been the key to his preservation. Because 60 years later, when the box was reopened, it revealed a mummy.
This is the hole where Bukai entered nirvana. It's very deep. I wonder if I can get down in there. Oh my. Take my lotus posture. This is a spooky place to be. And I think if you were not a holy person, you wouldn't be able to endure it. It's almost superhuman. It is superhuman. You couldn't do it.
Bukai's long starvation didn't just have a spiritual effect. It also shrunk down his organs and muscles and destroyed the bacteria in his intestines. With no microbes to eat away at his corpse, Bukai's body was preserved. Could this also have happened to the Tibetan mummy?
Could it be that he starved himself to death as part of a meditational process?
The answer to that may be locked in the chemistry of tiny samples of hair taken from the mummy. 6,000 miles away, in Oxford University's radiocarbon accelerator unit, Margaret Cox is awaiting the test results from the samples.
The first date that we ran, Margaret, was the hair sample, and as you can see from the readout here on the screen, the highest probability is that this date is within the 15th century AD.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a remarkable finding. It means the Tibetan mummy died 500 years ago. That's 400 years older than the Japanese mummy Bukai. But the hair sample has another secret to reveal too.
The stable isotopes of nitrogen and carbon tell us something about the diet of this individual. The most interesting aspect of that is the nitrogen is much, much higher, and one of the possible explanations for this is that this individual has been fasting, probably over the last 3 to 4 months of his life.
Victor is back in India, where Margaret calls him with the results from Oxford.
I do have some news for you, and I think you might like it. We have a date of about 1475 AD, so the mummy's over 500 years old.
Whoa. That's much earlier than I thought.
It's a real surprise, I think.
Wow, it's great.
So you're pleased?
I thought it might only be 100 or 200 years at the most. Whoa, that's amazing.
But the next piece of news is music to Victor's ears.
Yeah, the isotopes are really interesting as well. We've got high nitrogen levels, which means that he probably was extremely malnourished for about 3 months before he died.
Well, that confirms my suspicions.
It's really good news, isn't it? And we've got an extra piece of news for you as well. We've got a date now for the meditation bout, and it's the same age range as the mummy.
Okay, that's very, very interesting. And it makes my life a lot easier because now a lot of the things have some scientific evidence, so that's fantastic news. Thank you so much, Margaret.
Okay, well, you take care, Victor. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye. Oh. Amazing. Just so much earlier than I thought. I really was thinking it might have been 50, 100 years, 200 years at most, but here we have probably 500 or more years. So now I have evidence, scientific evidence. This is great, really good news. Really happy.
So now Victor knows when the monk died and how he was mummified. But he still doesn't know why. Now he has returned to Tabo, the monastery closest to his shrine, where these rituals are largely unchanged from 5 centuries ago. The temples too date from the mummy's time. He once walked these very paths and alleys. But for Victor, the big question remains. What drove the monk to sacrifice himself? At the age of 18, the young monk would have begun to train his mind and develop his discipline. He would have studied the Buddhist deities, painting their images in Tibetan murals. In the monastery's courtyard, he would have spent long hours debating philosophical issues, trying to understand the idiosyncrasies of life. For weeks on end, he would have disciplined himself by performing difficult and painful acts of initiation, like the 100,000 prostrations. And month after month, he developed his mental powers, meditating upon the 4 noble truths and the impermanence of all existence. His full studies would have taken 15 years to complete. Only then would he be initiated into the secret world of tantric meditation, like those studied by Dr. Herbert Benson, to glimpse the hidden power of these teachings. But for this one monk, an even greater sacrifice lay ahead. High up in an ancient Tibetan valley, Dr. Victor Mair is looking for evidence to explain the presence of a meditation strap wrapped tight around the neck of this mummified monk. Then, in old tantric scripts in the library of the Tabo monastery, he finds reference to the use of suffocation, self-asphyxiation, to improve the experience of meditation. Could this be the explanation? In the meditation caves above the monastery, Victor tries to re-experience the monk's final moments.
If you're doing this, you really have to be trying to achieve something important. And I think what our mummy was trying to do, obviously, and he succeeded, was to self-mummify. He probably was not eating very much or drinking very much, so that would contribute to the self-mummification. But the strap was placed in such a manner that it would have killed him as soon as he stopped meditating. And I think that was his vow. You know, I'm going to do this to the last minute.
Victor now understands how the monk died and how he came to be so well preserved. But the most compelling question remains: why did he choose to die? The town of Dehradun is home to a large Buddhist community of Tibetan refugees. Victor hopes one of their most renowned leaders can help find an explanation. Through a translator, Kokchen Rinpoche explains why he thinks the monk died: to safeguard the people of his valley.
And what Rinpoche knows about is of cases where teachers have specifically left instructions that their body was not to be touched or destroyed, and that would avert a natural disaster, famine, diseases in the country, and so forth. Then it is quite certain that it must have been preserved body of a teacher kept as a relic to benefit the land. If it was on a ridge facing the land, it probably was to benefit the land.
It all makes sense. The mummy chose to die on a ridge overlooking the lands he wanted to protect.
The reason why he chose to mummify himself has been around me all the time.
The clues are carved into the petroglyphs on nearby rocks.
The symbolism that we see on this rock is at a stage before Buddhism arrived, and it tells us what the people who lived here believed in. The rocks are covered with animal imagery, but very seldom do we see anything having to do with plowing, planting, or fields, which this may represent fields. But in this area, even now, agriculture cannot play an extremely important role because of the quality of the soil and the aridity. It's so dry here.
So the people here lived on the very edge of survival and needed all the help they could get. It seems the brave monk of Tabo, perhaps facing a worse famine than usual, decided to make the ultimate sacrifice for his people and turn his body into a holy relic. In seclusion, he began his Dzogchen meditation, using his meditation belt to constrict his breathing, and slowly he suffocated himself until he died, believing his meditation would continue forever as a blessing for an infertile land. In the cold, dry climate, his emaciated body endured as a kind of holy monument and an inspiration to those who would follow. But then Victor makes another shocking discovery. Before the Chinese Cultural Revolution, there were hundreds of mummies. When Chinese leaders ordered their desecration, Tibetans chose instead to cremate them. Almost all were destroyed. The mummy at Tabo survived only because it was buried safely, just inside the Indian border. Victor makes one last visit to the mummy, now as much a pilgrim as scientist.
It's been quite a few weeks since I saw the mummy, but I'm seeing him now with very different eyes. He's still exactly the same mummy, in exactly the same position, but I understand him a lot better now. What I really marvel at is his achievement. He couldn't have done this without a tremendous amount of determination, fortitude, and intense concentration. In a way, he's a Superman. To me, he's a Superman. He did something that the average human being can't do. He set out to become a Buddha in this life, and he achieved it.
It was a fate both terrible and heroic, a sacrifice and a kind of immortality. But the story does not end there. Today, at Dehradun and throughout the Himalayas, some monks are choosing the same path to enlightenment. They are studying the meditation techniques mastered 6 centuries ago by the Thabo monk. And some may even make the same ultimate sacrifice.
In a moment here on the History Channel, the deep-sea detectives investigate the collision of 2 ships in the English Channel.